Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence.
Hey, so today on the Advantage Podcast, I have the privilege of having Jason Mitchell with me today. Jason is the senior pastor at LCBC Church and somebody that I appreciate very much and have spent a lot of time with. And so, Jason, thanks for being here with us.
Absolutely. I got to ask, are you used to saying that, or is it still weird to say? Or
I don't know that I've actually introduced you. Have I ever introduced you that way? I don't know.
I think
if I have
maybe
or not before.
once. Yeah. It doesn't happen a lot. That's why it's even weird for me to hear you say that to a degree, but yeah.
Well, and it's funny because the first, so let me just tell you who Jason is real quick, and then I'll respond to that comment, Jason. For those of you that don't know Jason and don't know a lot about my background, Jason took my place, was my successor at LCBC Church as a senior pastor after I spent 32 years in that role. And so the first, Jason, I will tell you the first probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, and I would be at church. I didn't attend at Mannheim, but I would go to other LCBC campuses, and you'd get up to speak, and it would have LCBC senior pastor. And I mean, inside of me, I'd flinch and go, wait a minute, that's my title. And so that was an adjustment for me just to get used to that. So,
yeah. Well, it's been a couple of, 2.5, almost coming up on 3 years this fall, I guess. So you're okay now. We're okay.
Most of the time, yes. There's still times that something will hit me. I go, hey, wait a minute. But they're farther and fewer between.
Yeah. Well, it's good to be with you, David.
Yeah, thank you for taking time. And really what I'd like to do today, Jason, is just talk a little bit about your experience as a first-time senior pastor. And as you said, it's now 2.5, coming on 3 years next fall. And so it's not like you're necessarily new to the position. But one of the things we're doing actually sometime in the next year is a workshop for new or first-time senior pastors.
Yep.
And so you would fit in that category. I think we said 0 to 5 years. And I thought it'd be fun to talk to you about what your experience has been like as you stepped into that role. Maybe a little bit about what you wish was different or what you've liked about that situation. And I think I've told you, the transition for me, I probably spent more time the first year confessing to God and saying, God, I'm sorry. Pride is making me think silly things or feel silly things. And I mean, totally wrong feelings, but they were there. And so it has been an adjustment for me over the last couple of years. And I'm sure it's been an adjustment for you too. So maybe real quick, tell us about your family and then talk about what you feel like this first 2 years, 2.5 years have been like for you.
Been up here at LCBC for 23 years.
So it's not like you're new to LCBC by any means.
No. This is what's really special, actually. Jenny and I talk about this pretty often, is how special it is to essentially grown up in this. I mean, from a leadership life perspective, this is our home. This is the church we grew up in. And this was our first ministry assignment, came here out of college. And even just today, I just emailed a guy, 30 minutes ago. And it's a young man. I say young man, probably early 30s, has a young family now. And he's sitting there telling me, and he's still at the church, and he's telling me all these things. And this is a kid that he was in 6th grade when I met him, and he was in our student ministry. And here we are 23 years later and still been able to lead and pastor him. And I recognize how rare and kind of a gift that is. And so been up here 23 years. And
hey, Jason, real quick, so let me interrupt you for a second. We enjoy laughing about your coming on staff at LCBC. I think you might embellish the story a little bit, but over the years we progressed as we've hired staff. And you came on and actually attended a conference. Well, we had maybe 6 or 8 staff at that time, or pastors at that time, and you came on and went to a conference with us in California.
Yeah, well, first of all, we went through a pretty extensive interviewing process back in those days, and still do. Take everybody and probably should go through an intensive process, but no one really ever offered me a job. And I got invited to go to this conference with the pastors here, David. I think at that point, maybe our leadership team, like you said, 8 to 10 people. And I was like, I'll go to the conference with you guys, even though I'm not on staff yet. And so I just remember, even on that plane ride, I was sitting across the aisle from you, and you looked over at me and you go, so did someone offer you the job? And I said, no. And you go, well, do you want it? I go, yeah. And then you shook my hand and go, welcome to the team. So needless to say, we've improved our HR system since then. But then we get to California, And this is my first experience with LCBC from a leadership team perspective. And we were there for, I think it was a leadership network conference for 2 or 3 days. And so we get to the end of it. This is in Southern California. So we're near Burbank, I think that was the airport. And I was kind of liking these guys, the team at that point. I'm like, hey, I've known them for 48 hours. I'm glad I said yes on the plane. This is nice. But anyways, we get to the airport. I had to leave early to get back, and the rest of the team was sticking around. And everybody kept talking about seeing the sunset. I mean, it was like no one's ever seen a sunset in their life. They got to go down to the pier, the Santa Monica Pier, and see the sunset. And so I recognize I'm a burden at this point
You were.
because if it wasn't for me, everybody would be at that dock. The team would be at that dock watching that sunset, but they got to take me to Burbank. Well, anyways, if that wasn't already clear to me, it became very clear at the airport because I get out of the van to grab my bags. I get out, I open the back doors, I grab my bag, I turn around to set the bag on the ground. I turn back around to say goodbye to everyone. And there was no one to say goodbye to. The van was gone. So, so my point is, you guys were very glad to get rid of me in that moment. And I thought, what have I gotten myself into? Who are these people that just leave me stranded on the West Coast? I don't even know them. So anyways, that was kind of how it all got out of the gate and started. But I'm grateful to say it was all uphill from there. So,
Hey, Jason, what's fun about those stories, though, a couple things that jump out to me. One, the interview process was long enough that we knew each other,
yeah,
not
yeah,
real well, but we knew that we were going to like each other. We knew you were going to be a good fit. You knew you were going to be a good fit. And so sometimes we get hung up on formalities and we need systems and things like that, but we need to, is the chemistry there? Is it the right fit? And so all those things. And then it's even just to be able to have fun together.
yeah.
And I always say it's not like we all think we've got to be best friends and we don't hang out together every weekend or things like that. But we all like each other. We enjoy being together, and we enjoy your embellished stories of how things might have happened when they actually got
Yes,
started. So,
exactly.
so your
So
first position was middle
yeah,
school.
middle school. So I came up here, one of the things that I feel serves me really well now is over 20 years, I had my hands in pretty much, I mean, almost every level of the organization except for the seat that you were sitting in. And just meaning, I'm sure that's not, really the case, but I mean, student
Yeah.
ministry involved in that, involved in next gen at one point, and, sort of all the way through 29. We went multi-site then. And so now beginning to have to think at a different level with multi-site, became a campus pastor in 2013. So did that for five and a half, 6 years, came back. And at that point, when I came back in 2018, you and I were talking a little bit more, behind the scenes, at least, about potential succession and transition. However, you were giving me more and more responsibilities to even lead sort of an executive team level. And so by now that serves me so well because I'm able to tell our student ministry guys, with intent, like, hey guys, I get it. Or our campus pastors, hey, I get it. And I've had my hands in all of that. And, I don't get the luxury. So many people who, I mean, really the church grew up with you, David, I mean, for all intents and purposes, really the founder leader. And what I think a benefit of that is you're there from the infancy and you get to see it. And so I don't have that privilege, but it kind of gives me the same insights maybe at times to have my hands in a lot of those things. And so I just look at that now as a real gift, and glad I had all of those experiences, but did a lot of different things for those 20 years before stepping into this role.
Yeah, that's good. I asked you early on to tell about your family real quick. So describe your
Oh
family
yeah.
and then we'll go back into
Yeah,
the other.
Jenny and I have been married for a long time. So it's a long time, 24 years. It's always 1 year longer than I've been up here. So 24 years. We've got, we got 3 kids. We have a daughter who's a freshman at Liberty University, and we've got a high school sophomore, our son Silas, our daughter Sienna, and then Silas. And then we've got a little guy. He's 6 years old, soon to be 7, and he's excited about that. He let me know today he's like 29 days away. So, and his name is Solomon.
That's cool.
So yeah,
That's
our
good.
life is real fun right now.
Yeah, I'll bet. So before we talk about you in the senior pastor role, let's talk about leading up to that because, like you said, you were in a lot of different positions. You and I had conversations over the years about desires that you had to be ready to lead on your own or lead in a higher capacity. And so describe some of those feelings and then maybe describe what made you decide to stick it out at LCBC because I think a lot of us have those kind of feelings. And so describe that a little bit in your situation.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think some of I would say probably when was that, David? In my early 30s. Um, one of the conversations you and I had was I had been in ministry probably at 12 years, something like that. Let's just say it had been that 10-year mark, at least over that 10-year
Yeah.
mark, and had varying experiences that I felt were bringing me to life and was loving it. I've always, I love obviously the mission of the local church and what we were seeing happen. And I didn't really have a clear sense of what the role would be, but I did have a sense of, man, I'm just wanting to lead more. I'm wanting to. It's always a weird thing because there's a fine line between, I guess, kind of ambition and ego, and
Yeah.
it's always a weird thing, I think, for leaders to figure out, where is this just my
Yeah.
ego, or
Where's the line?
is this
Yeah.
God given? And I think sometimes we err almost. I mean, I hate to say it, but almost on the humility side, to where we don't actually step out and do big things that God's really uniquely wired and designed us to do. But also it's a tension. And I think I just came to you and I just told you, hey, I've got these tensions and I'm feeling this, and I don't even know if that's right. I don't know if that's good, but I can't deny it either. And you were incredibly helpful in that process. And the thing that you told me that was so helpful, and that I have stolen and I will always say now from now on, and I think it's just, and it was so empowering, is you just said, I felt all of those things when I was at your stage of life. And just you saying that made me feel, okay, I'm not crazy. And you didn't shame me for it, because I think sometimes you could have, it was a little bit of a risk to saying, hey, I think I'm wanting to lead more. And I think and it's a little bit speaks to our relationship, but I know some guys have taken that risk and said, and their senior pastor or their senior leader saying, well, then go lead somewhere.
Yeah.
You gave me the space though to work it out and go, well, maybe there's a place here. And we weren't even talking about senior pastor stuff at that point. It was
Right.
just more, how do we create space? So that was a very formative moment for me, as I was thinking about kind of, God, how have you uniquely designed me and wired me? And so you started thinking through, and we started thinking through, are there expanded leadership opportunities even within some of the roles that I was already playing here? I think, when it comes to leadership development, one of the interesting things, and so I do find this with a lot of our right at early 30 something. Probably in the last year, I've had 5 conversations with early 30 somethings leaders who are all kind of articulating that same thing, which is they feel an internal shift. And I think that's actually really normal and natural and good. And I think that's the shift between, in your 20s, it's like you're just figuring out how to work and you're
Yeah.
just making stuff, and that's good. Your 30s, you start to think at a little bit, I think, a higher level, and go, man, what impact am I making to a degree? And so all that to say, as you kind of work with even our young leaders now, I just try to give space now to go, it's okay. And
Yeah.
let's figure out how to reinvent. A new role doesn't always solve that, is my point. You've got to figure out how to reinvent yourself within the role that you already have. And I think a lot of the 30 somethings, at least that we lead here, they think it's another role that's needed to satisfy that. And I always try to challenge and say, I don't think it's another role. I think you've got to figure out how to reinvent yourself within the role. Because if it's another role that's needed, think about all of us who are in senior leadership roles. That means we're done.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
so that can't be it. So we
Yeah.
have to go, how do we continue to reinvent what we do in order to get and maximize sort of the position that we're in? So
Yeah.
anyways,
That's
all
good.
that to say, David, you gave me a lot of space for that. And that was a really pivotal kind of season for me.
So couple things to pull out of that real quick, Jason. One is just honesty and candor and
Mm,
being willing to be honest with one another and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. For me to be honest and say, hey, I felt that too. I understand what you're going through. I realize that it probably differs depending on who's having that conversation or who's having it
mm,
with me. You were somebody that I saw with great potential in the future. Somebody else may have come and had the same conversation, and I might
yeah.
have said, you know what, then maybe it's time for you to look elsewhere. So
Yeah.
there's always that. it just
There's
changes. There's
context.
variables
Context
there.
matters. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But I think the key is having that honest discussion. And I'd rather somebody come if they're thinking about that kind of thing. I'd rather they go ahead and come and tell me or tell you. So then I can figure out, okay, what do I want to do with that? And if I want to fight to keep them, then I better start fighting because they're on the verge of stepping out. Or if I don't, then I let them kind of go on their way. And
Mhm.
then what's interesting, Jason, is somebody that I don't want to necessarily try to keep starts doing that and they don't go on their way, then I start checking out on them and so then I help them get on their way. But it's an
Yep.
interesting thing. But I think openness, candor is real critical in that point. So
Yeah. Go
yeah. So
ahead. Go
Jason, I
ahead.
was gonna say we changed some roles, not necessarily roles. We did change some roles, but again, how you operated, more influence. What kept you at LCBC? So at some point, you and I made the decision. We talked about, okay, I think you have a future here as the senior leader at LCBC, and that was though I don't know 6, 7 years before, at
Yeah,
least,
it was.
if not
Yeah.
longer, before it ever happened. And so, what kept you in the game? Because I know you had other opportunities, and so what kept you in the game at LCBC?
Well, two things come to mind that are obvious to me that kept me in the game here. And the first is what we're seeing God do here at the church. I mean, that's the first and foremost. And I can't imagine how, waiting sometimes can be difficult, but how much more painful waiting would be if it feels like there's not a work of God happening. I mean, so we're
Yeah,
just seeing God move. We're seeing, I mean, our mission is to introduce people to Jesus and together fully follow him. And we're seeing that we had been continue to see that happen. And so that at the end of the day, it was a deep sense of the mission just kind of is in me
yeah,
and to see that happening. So to see people being found in Christ is like, okay, this is worth waiting for. Whatever's happening here is worth it. But the other thing is more personal. The other honest reason is I trusted you.
mm,
And that is an incredibly important. I mean, trust is obviously we all know trust is one of the most important commodities out there. And had I not trusted you that you would that you were meaning what you were telling me, that you wouldn't go back on what you've said. I mean, then I don't know how I could have done that either. So there was those two things: a fundamental trust in you, and then honestly a fierce commitment to the mission that God was doing uniquely, has been doing it at LCBC. And those two things probably got me through some of the moments where it was hard to wait, and it is hard to wait sometimes. But
yeah.
those two
And
things.
trust, yeah, and trust goes both ways, Jason, where you had to trust me. And when you talk
Yep.
about trust, I assume you're saying that I'm not going to decide, oh, I think I can go 4 or 5 years longer than I
Yeah.
thought. So wait another 4 or 5 years before we make the transition. Trust is that I wouldn't choose to go out and get Google eyes at somebody else outside the
Yep.
organization and look for them. And so took trust on your part. But for me, it took trust that I'm making these plans for my future, your future, the future of the church, that you're not going to bail out and choose to go elsewhere. And so, yeah, it's this delicate dance that you kind of go through. And so, one of our commitments all the way through is let's just keep talking to each other. And if we're
Yep.
feeling a little bit goofy in here, let's talk about it. So,
Well, and that got us through, I think, a couple of moments. I remember one of a pretty low moment for me was probably the halfway point. So if you think about it, was an 8 year from the time we ever first talked about it to the time it happened, it was probably roughly 8 years. And that low point was probably that 4 year mark because it had already been 4 years. And I knew, oh gosh, we've got another 4 or 5 years. And I just had a lot of vision kind of stirring up in me. And so what got me through that was I think that I felt it really strongly one weekend. I can remember where I was. I mean, it was very tough. And I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. And I think Monday or Tuesday, I don't know when it was, but it was within a couple of days, I came to you and we talked. That's what gets you through it
yeah,
is,
yeah,
is we had a relationship and we have a relationship where we could talk about that kind of stuff. And so imagine if I didn't have that, now I'm processing all that by myself. And that's where you kind of get goofy with some of the sin stuff. Even it's like, well, he's holding me back or whatever it might be. Like
yeah,
it can go off that way, or you kind of get isolated in your decision making and you start making decisions that aren't even based on reality because you're sitting there going, I could help solve some of that if you talk to me, but if I
yeah.
never talk, we can't figure that out.
Yeah, exactly. And I know your biggest frustration typically was I feel like I'm just sitting on the shelf. I could be
Yep.
making more of a contribution, and why am I just kind of wasting these years? I know
Yep.
it's what you kind
That
of
was my
verbalized.
fear. That was
Yeah,
my fear.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. But then on the other side of it, what you're holding out for is it's what I just described earlier when we started talking. It's that email to that guy that I've known for 20. How could I couldn't get that any other way. You can't shortcut that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You can only wait for it. And
And you said
so
since then, Jason, that actually, you felt like that was a big part of your preparation, that waiting sometimes is the best education you could possibly have.
waiting is patience, and another the spiritual way of saying it is patience, but waiting
Yeah.
is I think one of the most undervalued virtues and character traits in leadership. And the reason why is because see, we all see the leaders who go and they do the big thing, and they they're 27 or 28, and I'm all for that, by the way, but they do all that, and it's much. But what happens? I mean, how many of those have we seen that the growth ends up outpacing character? I mean, look, all you got to do is quick Google search, and you're going to see this kind of stuff. So my point is, in the waiting is where you're formed, character is formed. And I tell young leaders, and when I say young, I mean 30s, 40s, you know what I mean? Just, I think my best years are ahead of me. So I tell leaders all the time, man, it's worth it. Like, I know it feels like you're setting stuff on a shelf, but what the character formation that God's forming in you now, and you're going to go further faster once the thing happens.
Yeah.
And, you still got to build trust. I actually think that's a mistake that guys make who've been in a role and then they at the same church and they step into it. They think all of those chips that they've had for 15, 20 years come with them. And they do to a degree, but they don't also. You still gotta, they don't know you as senior pastor yet.
Yeah.
So you still gotta, but it will happen way quicker. I mean, imagine if no one even knew me. It would take 5 years or 3 years.
Exactly.
So you still gotta earn those. You still gotta gain trust because they gotta learn you in this new role. It's like, just because I'm a great husband doesn't mean I'm a great dad. Like, I still need to go be a dad for a little bit. Yeah. So, but because I know you're a great husband, I can know you're probably going to be a great dad. So it's almost like you can get there further faster, but so.
Yeah, cool. So let's talk about, you've been in the position now for 2.5 years, let's say. So what's that been like? And has it been enjoyable? Are there surprises you've experienced over those last 2.5 years?
Well, I would say that the first year, James Byers is one of our executive pastors here, and he told me, he's like, man, if I had a nickel for every time you said I'm having a blast, he was like, we could pay off all of our, we could open up a ton of new campuses. And so that first year, it was just a lot of fun. And the second year was not a blast. The second year.
Let's talk about why that. But first, let me say, while you're having a blast your first year, I'm over here dying, going, "Oh my goodness, what have I done?" And so it's funny that you're saying that. And yet now I look back and I'm so thankful we did what we did at the time that we did it, and that God led us through that. But it wasn't necessarily all fun the first year, at least not the first 6 months for me. But I'm glad it was fun for you.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, we teeter-tot. We did that. We seesawed.
Exactly.
I think the first year, it's like a honeymoon, I guess, in a sense. It's kind of like, hey, everything's, great and all that kind of stuff. And you got to remember too, the season we were coming off COVID. Yeah. So we had kind of been through COVID, but I think most of the people listening to this right now, we've all experienced another wave since, kind of a wave of growth and all that. And so it was that, there was a lot of that happening. And so that made it all a blast. But what's interesting is I think that also there were some people, you kind of get through all your first Christmas, your first Easter, your first series as a senior pastor. And so people are kind of watching all these seasons. And I think the second year it hits some people. Oh, you're not changing the thing. I thought you were going to be. And I think for some people that hits them. And so that's an interesting thing. But I also think what happened, we found that some of the relationships, the personal relationships, now remember, I was here for a while and I had friendships with people on staff. There's a dynamic that has to change. And the best way of saying, maybe the easiest way, I'm not your bro anymore.
Yeah. And
that doesn't mean we're not friends and all that kind of stuff. I think everybody listening understands. And some people cannot make that shift. It's very hard for them to make that shift. And I didn't help with some of it because I wish I would have, looking back, hindsight's 20/20, but I wish for some people I would have just said, hey, things are going to have to change. and that's okay. But like, I would just wish we probably would have had the maturity to, or maybe the foresight to have said that with some people. And so some of it's very personal, David, what I'm describing here. And we lost some friends and through that, and some
Where,
of them,
Jason, they were hoping that the relationship they had with you, maybe that they had more influence with you,
yes,
or
yes, that's precisely. I think
okay,
that's precisely what it is. And also, also expecting the things we can talk about to continue. Like, there's just things I can't process with everyone anymore,
yeah,
and it wouldn't be right.
yeah,
And so that some of that was there. I had one person tell me, they were like, "Hey, um, once the announcement was made, so the transition hadn't even happened yet. You just made the announcement," and they were like, "Hey, this is the very first thing they told me," which is telling a little bit, but they said, "Don't let this affect." It was a group. It was like a group that we were involved in. They're like, "Don't let this affect the group dynamics." And I wish I would have had probably the wisdom at that point to say, um, it can't not. It's going
yeah,
to.
yeah.
And so let's just call that what it is and be okay with that and close out this one chapter and open up a new
Yeah.
one. But so I think that was there. That
So
second,
this is this kind of that second year when you
yeah,
said it
this
got
is
harder
that
the second
second
year?
year.
Yeah.
And I think because of it, because remember the first year, I think people are kind of
Waiting, watching.
waiting a little bit and
Yeah.
going, will we? And so yeah, that second year was tough in that sense. And then we had some external stuff. That was very internal. We had some external stuff happen that second year as well. We had a theft. We had a third party administrator with our 403B plans steal a significant amount of money from our
Millions
employees.
of dollars. So,
Yeah, from our employees' retirement accounts. Now, you want to hear something interesting? And my guess is listeners will understand this. The pastors listening will understand this. I found out about that 403B theft first thing Monday morning. This is in January. Yeah, first thing Monday morning. Then these relationships, in particular, there was very specific, blew up on Wednesday, the same week. The thing that kept me up at night was not the millions; it was these relationships,
mm-hmm.
and partly because we're going to be like we're going to figure that out. But as pastors, I think we all know it's the interpersonal stuff
Yeah.
that hurts. It's the interpersonal stuff that weighs on you. It's the interpersonal stuff that's where the work is so
Yeah.
often.
Yeah. Do you feel like, Jason, now 2 years later, do you feel like there's either a weight, or sometimes pastors will talk about the weight they carry, or sometimes pastors will talk about they just feel lonely, they don't have the same relationships, since you're talking about relationships now. Do you feel either of those?
I felt the first week, I felt really lonely. And the
Mm,
reason why is because I'm talking about the very first week. And I realized it's because I didn't have a it feels this way. I felt like I didn't have a backstop anymore. You were always my backstop.
mm,
So if I ever thought, I think this is right. I just walked 10 feet down the hall and I'd knock on your door. And every time you're like, come on. And I always had that.
yeah.
And that's the loneliness. It's not relational loneliness.
Yeah.
Oh, it's on me.
Yeah. I have to make the decision.
I got
Yeah.
to make the decision.
Yeah.
And that went away after, I mean, that I don't feel that way today. But I think partly because one is just you settle in with your teams and all
Right.
that. And so you realize so some of it again is not reality. It's just how you feel. So some of that's there, but then also, honestly, I've found some of the most helpful relationships to be with other pastors.
Yeah.
I think that's why the work the evangelist is doing is so critically important. I mean, it's so critically important because there's something about having someone outside of the water that you're swimming in that can encourage, that can give perspective, that can help you see angles that you're not seeing. I mean, all that kind of stuff. They can just encourage you.
Yeah.
When we were going through some of that stuff with the 403B issues and even the interpersonal stuff, I had multiple other guys who are leading just say, "Hey, been there too. You're going to be okay. It's going to be," and just hearing that, it's like, all right,
Yeah.
we're going to be okay. So,
Yeah. That's good.
yeah. So those things I felt in that first year, as well. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Anything you wish was different about the first couple of years?
yeah. No,
I was gonna say, you don't have to
no,
fabricate something. It's
no,
yeah.
no, no. I really don't. And there's nothing, that I think you could be, I could have been more prepared for or anything like that. Some of it is you gotta jump in and you got to
Yeah.
do it, and you can't prepare. That we want to prepare our staffs for every single thing they'll ever face, and you just can't. And so the more important thing is to prepare their character to face whatever it is they're going to face.
Yeah.
And I feel like that happened really well. So no, I don't think there's anything that comes to mind with that.
One of the things that you and I had talked about, we had been together. We joked more than we were with our spouses or families for probably 5 or 6 years
Yeah.
in leading up to the transition. And I really enjoyed that relationship. And I said, I'd love for that to continue, but I know that it's going to be very different and it may not continue in the same way. So, one of the commitments that I made to you is I'm not going to come to you with
Yeah.
suggestions or ideas or anything that way. If you've got questions, I would love to talk and I would love to keep the relationship going. Um, are there things that you wish I did differently or could have been more helpful to you? Or are there things that you found helpful just to help other people in thinking through this?
Um, yeah, I mean, well, first of all, see, that's the kind of, I feel like, conversation that should be had. Our relationship will look different. I mean, kind of going back to that earlier
Yeah.
conversation, like
Yeah.
sometimes you need to say that and
Just
you need
call
to
it out.
define
Yeah.
it, just call it out. And that also gave me, see, when you're following someone, and I don't know how many, pastors listen to this or in that role where they're following someone, but you want to be honoring and you want to be deferential to a degree. I mean, in the sense of honoring, and it's a weird dynamic because you also want to lead, and you don't want to come across, and you kind of like, I hope they trust my intentions, that I'm not trying to say that what they were doing was, and so you get in your head a little bit. So my point is, by you even saying that as the outgoing guy, the person saying I'm handing this over, that means a ton. That means a lot because it empowers me to go, okay, he's not expecting me to call him at every single, but he's also saying I'm here if you need me. And there have been times where I've called you and said, "Hey, can I bounce something? How did you think through this?" So much of it is just, how did you think through this thing? Or when you were approaching this, or here's what I'm thinking. Am I missing any angles on this? That kind of stuff's so helpful. And I feel like I'd be so foolish to not take advantage of that. And so,
And I've always tried to be real careful not to tell you what I think the decision should be,
yeah.
but instead try to keep it at how I think through things. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you even started shifting that a little bit, um, probably before the transition even happened. I remember you and I going
Mm.
off site and kind of just thinking through probably a year before it happened, or maybe, I don't know, 9 months before the transition actually happened. And I was telling you about some leadership structure stuff, and you're like, and you're like, I'm just going to talk to you like, I mean, even though you were in the first chair,
Yeah.
so you could have whatever. I mean, but you're saying I'll talk to you as like a consultant in a sense. I mean,
Yeah.
quote
Yeah.
unquote, and just say, here's what you should be thinking about. Have you thought about this? And but certainly didn't tell me what to think. I think, David, the biggest thing, um, you know, when we went through the transition, and I think this principle applies to any leadership sort of development, regardless of whether it's a senior pastor transition. Um, you can, content is ubiquitous. Content you can get anywhere now. You really can. And you do a quick YouTube search and you'll find how to do succession, how to lead, how to lead well, how to engage conflict, whatever. What you cannot replace and what you cannot get any other way is my time with you. It's being together.
Mhm.
It's traveling together. It's being in your home. It's when we took international trips, we took domestic trips. It's seeing you in the airport, how you treat how you treat the people who are checking in your bags. And I know all this sounds almost simple. This is where leadership development happens. And it's watching you behind closed doors and how you process a global pandemic and what we're going to do. All of these things that's development. And how do you replicate that through a book? Or you can't. And so what was modeled for me, I take that responsibility very seriously to pass that on. I'm constantly thinking about if I've got I remember, David, 20 something years ago when you had an interview, I think down at some radio station. I was probably 20, 22, 23 years old. And you were like, you want to ride with me? And you could have gone down there by yourself. We rode together. We just got an hour of time in the car. We grabbed lunch. We got another hour. You're already having to do that. And you're just thinking, including. And my point is, as leaders, I think sometimes we get can I get drilled in on the task? I got to get this thing done. I got to get up to this campus. I got to go do this thing. And we don't think development, and everything we do is a development opportunity. When we're thinking through a decision, invite a young leader in who has nothing to do with the decision, and just so they hear how you think. It's not about what the decision was. You want them to know how you processed it. And that was modeled for me. And, I feel like that's a value I hold, and I think we're trying to do better at even
That's
now.
cool. One of my biggest failures with you, Jason, is early years. We would spend time together as families watching Survivor, and then at some
Yeah.
point you decided you had outgrown that, and now you're missing out. You missed out for like the last 10, 15
Uh,
years, but it's still a
well,
great show.
I've told you, I think the rest of America decided they've outgrown that, David. I think there's 7 people still watching that show, and you and Ruth are 2 of them. So,
You know what? I had opportunity last week to be with the Willow Creek staff. They wanted to talk through some of the transition they're going through with Sean Williams stepping in for
yeah,
Dave Dummett.
yeah.
And I don't know why, but as we're talking, I just happened to say I'm a Survivor fan. That was the loudest cheer and rambunctious response to anything that I said or
Uh,
anything that happened in that meeting. So
do you
there are still a lot of us out there.
do you think it was a pity cheer? Because it might have been, David. They were like,
No, and
"Oh, that's
Jeff
so."
does well in the wheelchair as he's
Yeah,
still leading.
exactly,
So
exactly.
yeah.
David,
No,
I'm
it's
so I'm real grateful for you and for what the work that the Advantage. I mean, obviously, we're highly invested in what's happening with pastors across the state, and I'm just we're seeing so many, and the pastors that I talk to across the state as well. We're just seeing an openness in people right now. We're seeing some sort of a spiritual renewal in people. Like, people are coming to our
yeah,
churches wanting truth. They're wanting. I think so many things, David, right now have left the last 4 or 5 years have just left people shaken,
yeah,
honestly. And I don't think
yeah,
they know what to believe anymore. Can't trust the
yeah,
media. Can't trust politics. Can't trust science. Can't trust. So they've been told they can't trust anything. And I think,
right.
and it has kind of
And they're
shaken. And
doing
they're
that.
coming to our
Yeah,
churches going, just give me something true.
yeah,
And I've found for us right now at LCBC, we don't have to work so hard to win their ear anymore. Like, they're kind of coming in going and so I feel like the way even that's affected some of the way I'm preaching right now, I'm just trying to get there a little faster,
yeah,
because it's kind of like, hey, and they all have seen our churches online anyways. So
right.
they already know, and and I'm speaking hyperbolically here, but most of them at least know
Yeah,
what they're getting into. And so it's kind of like, cool. We're still going to do it in a winsome way. We're still going to do it. We're still going to think about the outsiders here. So we're going to make it simple and all that. So that's not changing. Those are our values,
yeah,
but we can also get there. And I think my point is, for the church leaders listening to this right now, most are experiencing that. And I pray that that's happening, and that we're taking
yeah.
it serious. So
Definitely seems like cool thing is God is doing some real cool things right now, and very much appreciate, Jason, your support for the Advantage, your support for
yeah,
Pennsylvania pastors and LCBC's involvement with this means a lot. So thank you.
yeah, absolutely.
Hey, one other question before we go. How has this new role affected your family? Has it?
That's a
You
great
notice different
question.
dynamics because of this?
Yeah, I mean, for one, is for Jenny is not. She does not need to be in the spotlight. Jenny is perfectly fine if no one. So that's my wife. That's just her personality, and she would be real good. And so she had to kind of get to a point where she goes, I have to be okay that lots more people are going to know me. We put out a big picture of our family during the vote and all that, and that's the thing. You're about to go out to 25,000 people, or however many that mailing went out to. So she had to sit there and go, okay. So that for her, but she's also grateful for that. But I mean, that's a shift for her. The kids have always been. We've worked really hard, really hard to raise our kids as normal as possible, and that we don't expect them to be any different just because they're pastors' kids. Other than what other you would expect a normal,
Yeah.
kid to be, respectful and all that kind of stuff. But not because, guys, you're making me look bad.
Yeah.
That is just like, that's
And
a
that
big
tends to
thing.
happen a lot for pastors.
I know, and man, and I grew up at PK, so maybe that's helpful context for me, because my parents protected that, and I was so grateful for that. But so I would say our kids probably haven't felt it a ton. I think Jenny maybe more than anyone, just because she's more known. But other than that, no, I think we've done, and we try to. The other thing with ministry real quick is we try to just include, and instead of I know how it is, guys. We all feel this, right? That tension, like we feel that tension when we're at work, we need to be at home. And sometimes when we're at home, we feel like we need to be working. And in some ways, I don't know if that ever goes away. I'm sure it won't. But at other times, I'm like, well, why do I have to choose? And I'll give you a perfect example. Like we had a friend of ours, someone, David, you and I both know, Dan Walabi came in and he spoke at the church a few weeks ago. And I just like Dan a ton. And so if he's here speaking, I want to get time with him. And so I was going to go to dinner that night with him. And I don't get a lot of weekends at home with my family. And so I was like, oh, this feels horrible that I don't have to be out. He's speaking, so I could be home. But then I was, well, why not just have Silas go with me? That's my 16-year-old to dinner with Dan. I'd love for him to be around an exceptional world-class leader. I'd love for him to, and now Silas and I are doing it together. And so now that alleviated all the tension I felt, because now I'm doing it with my son. I'm putting him around godly influences, which I want. So, I mean, just sometimes it's just thinking creatively and differently about it, and including each other in that. And then all of a sudden that tension, at least it's helped alleviate it, some of that. But those have been some of the shifts for our family.
Yeah, good. Hey, I know we're supposed to be done. One quick question, quick answer. How has it changed you personally?
Dependence on God. I mean, like it just changes the way that I think I pray, that I prepare messages, everything. It's just the responsibility and the weight of it, and going, God, I really need you. I really need you. There's no way I can do this without you.
That's good.
Yeah.
And, part of the leadership shift for you that happened, Jason, even as you and I were getting ready to go through this change, you were a good communicator, but at some point, and you and I talked about it, where you need to quit speaking for information and you need to start speaking as the leader.
Yep.
And it wasn't like you started being louder to kind of be the authority, but somehow you need to start teaching as somebody that does have authority. And I don't mean lord it over people, but there's that shift that it needs to happen. And it can be a quiet, just more of a confidence thing. I don't know. But I think that happened in you and needed to happen in you to step into that role. So
I saw something the other day, just a question that a pastor asked about a sermon, and it was like the last question. It was like a topic. So if we're going to cover this topic at church, we're going to talk about this. The last question they asked is, and why does our church in this season need to hear about this?
Yeah, that's good.
And just that little last question takes it from content to burden of like,
it's
why?
Not just a fun story, but it's
Yep. It's like, why is it need? And I think, David, to your point earlier, like that's felt more than it's even communicated. It's felt by people.
Yeah, that's good. That's cool. Hey, thank you, Jason, for taking time today.
Absolutely.
And again, appreciate LCBC's support and involvement in all of this. Again, we'll have a workshop coming up for first-time new pastors, senior pastors, looking for 0 to 5 years, I think is the window. And so you can go to the Advantage website and see that. But love to have those of you that are newer in this role be a part of that. And so, Jason, thanks. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, I appreciate it, David.
Talk to you later.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast with David Ashcraft, and for participating in our goal to strengthen and encourage pastors and their churches so more people are introduced to Jesus across Pennsylvania. If you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.